Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. And in car tech news, we're talking about Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, the two competitors. They're kind of unsafe. At least that's according to GM. Now, here's what's going on, and this is according to Lawrence Hodge of Jalopnik, who had a pretty good write-up off of Motor Trend's reporting, because speaking of Motor Trend, GM, or General Motors head of product infotainment, Tim Babbitt, explained that GM's decision to drop both Apple CarPlay and Android Auto about 8 months ago in favor of developing its own in-house system, and simply put, GM and Babbitt think that Apple CarPlay and Android Auto encourage cell phone use behind the wheel, therefore they are unsafe. Now, from Motor Trend, and I quote, according to Babbitt, CarPlay and Android Auto aren't perfect programs. They have stability issues that manifest themselves as bad connections, poor rendering, slow responses, and dropped connections. And when CarPlay and Android Auto have issues, drivers pick up their phones again, taking their eyes off the road, totally defeating the purpose for those phone mirroring programs. Solving those issues can sometimes be beyond the control of the automaker, and you can start to see GM's frustration, end quote. Now, essentially, the logic here is that if a car's built-in infotainment is good enough, drivers will be less likely to use their phone for what they've basically been trying to do while they're behind the wheel. Though Babbitt admits that GM hasn't exactly tested this in a controlled setting to see whether it's true or not. Now, to achieve this, GM's new system called Ultifi, which is making its debut in 2024, specifically in their Chevy Blazer EV, and it uses Google apps built right into their system, like Google Maps and Assistant, which GM hopes customers will use for more voice controls. It can handle things like calls, texts, it can control audio and climate systems and all of that, and quite frankly, most cars come baked in with that already, where you can just connect your phone via Bluetooth and let it start streaming automatically, or they have integrated apps for things like Spotify, different kinds of maps and all of that. But my experience so far, and for the record, I'm on the Android Auto side of the house. I have seen a little bit of Apple CarPlay, but I really haven't had issues with it. Very rarely does it, kick back with issues or seem to slow down or anything along the lines, and everything pops up from Google Maps to Spotify to, whatever you're into, Sirius XM, et cetera, right through the app. And so I don't really seem to have an issue with this. I really haven't had stability issues with it. And those that I know, when I've talked about, CarPlay versus, Android Auto, et cetera, they really haven't had that many issues too. And so the question is, if they really haven't tested this in a true environment, are they just throwing money down the pipe? I mean, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are standardized things in vehicles now. And quite frankly, I think some people will simply be turned off by that. Oh, well, I have my iPhone and I'm looking at Chevy versus Ford versus, another thing or whatever, and the Chevy doesn't have Apple CarPlay and the others do, well, I'm going to go buy the Ford instead of the Chevy. And I think that is something that Chevy and General Motors in general, all their product lines, are going to have to deal with. And quite frankly, I don't necessarily know if you're going to have a third competing system unless we have a third major cell phone offering its own systems. Now, obviously, as both Android and Apple continuously make new versions and improvements to Apple CarPlay and Android Auto respectively, they're going to continue to improve. And so the impetus here is on the head units, meaning the radios in your cars, to actually make sure they're updating themselves. I think the bigger issue here is that every time you go in with a traditional, and I'm not thinking like Tesla, but think Chevy or Ford or any one of those, and I've seen this for years in many different car brands that I've owned over the years, where I come in and say, hey, is there an update to my radio? Is there an update to my head unit? Is there a new firmware? And the answer is always no. I counted one in a rather nice car, nice brand, where I had about something like 60 to 70 different Bluetooth vulnerabilities crop up over the 4-ish years that I owned the vehicle, because they never updated it. Once it rolled off the lot, it was done. They never updated it again. And so if I've got new versions of Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, it's going to break eventually because it's going to become so incompatible. Now, Tesla was one of the first to pioneer over-the-wire updating and all of that. They had a massive quote-unquote recall the other day where they are basically over-the-air updating the cars for autopilot and all of that. That's where everybody should be. That's honestly something that Tesla's done and pioneered very well. And so if you're looking at traditional vehicles with that kind of integration, it's something that both Apple and Android have to keep into play as they are updating their versions. But at the same token, they also have to understand at some point they're going to have to deprecate out earlier versions of compatibility with earlier cars, which may lead to those kinds of bugs. But if you have a newer car with the latest version and it's compatible with the latest version, I don't think you've got much of an issue. But I'd love to hear from you if you use Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, if you've got these kinds of issues with stability. I find that when I'm using Android Auto, I almost never have to go to my phone. Occasionally, maybe to look up something like a phone number or something like that, because I don't use the audio controls through Google. But other than that, I almost never pick up my phone. It seems to be pretty fine, working with the cars that I've got. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and that is your news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private and safe while you're driving your car. Thanks, everybody.